First story by John Doe. It was the summer of 2018 when I decided to embark on a solo camping trip in the heart of Arizona's vast desert. The plan was simple, a 3-day getaway from the hustle of Phoenix where I lived. I had always found solace in the solitude of nature, and the rugged beauty of Arizona's landscape was irresistible. After a long drive, I set up camp in a remote area near the Superstition Mountains, known for their breathtaking views and eerie legends. The first day was as perfect as one could hope for. Clear skies, a gentle breeze, and an unspoiled wilderness stretching out before me. As night fell, I sat by the campfire, lost in the tranquility. That's when I first heard it. A faint, unidentifiable sound in the distance. It wasn't an animal. I knew the sounds of the desert well enough. This was different, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. I brushed it off as my imagination, but the feeling of unease lingered. The second night, the sound returned, closer this time. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, accompanied by what seemed like muffled voices. My initial thought was other campers, but I was miles away from the nearest trail. I decided to investigate, grabbing my flashlight and heading towards the source. As I moved through the darkness, the sounds grew louder, but strangely, no clearer. It was as if they were always just out of reach. Eventually, I found myself wandering aimlessly, the sounds now gone, and my campsite nowhere in sight. Panic set in. The desert at night is a different beast, disorienting and treacherous. By sheer luck, I stumbled back to my camp hours later, exhausted and unnerved. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with questions about what I had heard. The isolation I once cherished now felt oppressive, almost menacing. Dawn couldn't come soon enough, and with the first light, I packed up hastily and left, the haunting sounds of that night still echoing in my mind. To this day, I can't explain what I heard or why I lost my way so easily. The desert holds its secrets tightly, and sometimes I think it's better not to pry. That story sends shivers down my spine every time, but brace yourselves, because what's coming next is even more unsettling. Our next tale takes us into the heart of the woods, where Emily and her friends encounter something they'll never forget. Second story by Emily Smith. The year was 2021, and after months of lockdowns and isolation, my friends and I were desperate for a change of scenery. We decided on a camping trip to the dense, sprawling forests of the Adirondacks in upstate New York. There's something about being surrounded by ancient trees and starry skies that seemed like the perfect escape. Our group consisted of 5 of us: myself, Alex, Rachel, Mark, and Sophie. We had been friends since college, sharing a love for adventure and the outdoors. We found a secluded spot by a serene lake, perfect for our weekend getaway. The first day was blissful, filled with hiking, swimming, and laughter. As night fell on our second day, we gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows. That's when we noticed a faint light flickering through the trees. It seemed odd, as we were quite sure we were alone in this part of the forest. Curiosity got the better of us, and Alex suggested we check it out. We ventured deeper into the woods, guided by the mysterious light. It led us to a small, decrepit cabin, its windows aglow with candlelight. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie. We debated whether to approach it, but before we could decide, the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was an elderly man, his eyes piercingly sharp despite his frail appearance. He greeted us, his voice surprisingly warm. He introduced himself as Elias and invited us in. Against our better judgment, we accepted, curiosity overpowering our caution. The cabin was as eerie inside as it was out. Old photographs lined the walls, and the air was heavy with the scent of old books and candle wax. Elias regaled us with stories of his life in the woods, each tale more peculiar than the last. But as the night progressed, his demeanor shifted. His stories turned darker, speaking of people who wandered into the woods and never returned, of strange creatures that lurked in the shadows, and of the forest itself, alive and watching. The atmosphere became oppressive, our initial fascination turning to unease. We excused ourselves, saying that we needed to get back to our campsite. Elias's gaze followed us as we left, his parting words sending a shiver down my spine. "Be careful out there. The woods have eyes." The walk back was tense, each rustle in the bushes making us jump. When we finally saw the flickering light of our campfire in the distance, it was a relief. We spent the night in an uneasy silence, jumping at every sound. The next morning, we packed up as quickly as we could, eager to leave the forest and its unsettling secrets behind. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the haunting words of Elias echoing in my mind. That trip was supposed to be a fun escape, but it turned into a chilling reminder that some places and some people are best left undiscovered. That tale from Emily and her friends gives me goosebumps every time. But hold on tight, because our next story takes us even deeper into the unknown. Michael's experience in the mountains is something that will make you think twice about wandering alone in the wild. Third story by Michael Johnson. In the fall of 2019, I embarked on what was supposed to be a thrilling solo trek through the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. I've always been an avid hiker, and the idea of conquering some of the challenging trails alone was exhilarating. Little did I know, this trip would turn into a haunting experience that I'd never forget. I began my journey in high spirits, the crisp mountain air and the vibrant colors of autumn all around me. The first day was uneventful, filled with the usual challenges of a rugged hike. As night approached, I set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. The solitude was peaceful, or so it seemed. That night, a dense fog rolled in, so thick I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I've encountered fog before, but this was different. It felt almost suffocating. Dismissing it as a natural occurrence, I retreated into my tent, hoping for a clear morning. However, the next day brought no respite. The fog lingered, and with it came an eerie silence. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I decided to continue my trek, relying on my compass and map. But as I walked, a disorienting sensation took over. The trees seemed to shift, the paths changed, and I felt as though I was walking in circles. Panic set in when I realized I was lost. Every direction looked the same, shrouded in a never-ending mist. Hours turned into a day, and then another. My supplies were dwindling, and the cold mountain nights were unforgiving. Despair was setting in, and I started to believe I would never find my way out. On the third day, I stumbled upon a small cabin, seemingly abandoned. With no other options, I decided to take shelter for the night. The cabin was bare, save for a dusty old journal. Out of curiosity, I opened it and began to read. The entries were from a hiker who had gotten lost in these mountains years ago. His words were frantic, filled with tales of being watched, of shadows moving in the fog, and an overwhelming sense of dread. That night, huddled in the old cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I heard whispers in the wind, footsteps outside, and saw shadows flickering past the windows. The line between reality and my exhausted, fearful mind blurred. By sheer luck, the fog lifted slightly on the fourth day, and I managed to find a trail marker. It took me another day to find my way back to civilization, exhausted, hungry, and forever changed. The experience in those mountains was more than just a hiker losing his way. There was something in that fog, something in those woods that defied explanation. I still hike, but never alone, and never without respecting the power and mysteries of nature. Michael's ordeal in the mountains is a stark reminder of nature's unpredictability. Up next, we dive into a story that takes us to an old forest cabin, where the line between reality and nightmare becomes terrifyingly blurred. Prepare yourself for a tale of a night that turned into a fight for survival. Fourth story by Anonymous. It was the winter of 2020 when I found myself driving through the dense forests of Oregon, a place known for its vast wilderness and breathtaking landscapes. I had been traveling across the country, seeking adventure and solitude after a tumultuous year. That's when I stumbled upon an old, seemingly abandoned cabin deep in the forest. The cabin looked like it had been untouched for years, its wood weathered and covered in moss. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to spend the night there, a decision I would soon regret. I had always been fascinated by old buildings and the stories they held, but this place felt different, almost as if it was waiting for something or someone. As night fell, the forest around the cabin seemed to come alive. The howling wind sounded like whispers, and the creaking of the cabin's old structure was unnerving. I tried to brush off the feeling of unease, attributing it to the natural sounds of an old building. But as I settled in, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I had just fallen into a restless sleep when a loud thud jolted me awake. Heart racing, I listened intently, only to hear it again, followed by what sounded like footsteps outside. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously peered out the window. In the dim light, I could see footprints in the fresh snow, leading up to the cabin and then disappearing. Panic set in as I realized I wasn't alone. I barricaded the door with whatever I could find and waited, every sound amplifying my fear. Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. The footsteps continued intermittently throughout the night, circling the cabin, never venturing too far. Morning finally arrived, the sunlight bringing a sense of relief. I cautiously stepped outside, the footprints now more visible. They were unlike any I had seen before, large, misshapen, and leading off into the dense woods. I didn't stick around to investigate further. I grabbed my belongings and hurried back to my car, leaving the cabin and its secrets behind. That experience haunts me to this day. I still travel, still seek adventure, but I steer clear of abandoned places. There's something about that cabin in the Oregon woods that defies explanation. A reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved. Imagine spending a night in a place where every creak and whisper makes your heart skip a beat. Our next and final story takes us across the Atlantic, where Sarah's solo camping trip in Europe turns into a spine-chilling encounter that will leave you questioning every shadow. Fifth story by Sarah White. In the spring of 2022, I embarked on a solo camping tour across Europe. I had always dreamed of exploring the picturesque landscapes from the rolling hills of Tuscany to the rugged coastlines of Portugal. I was seeking a mix of adventure and solitude, a chance to reconnect with myself after a challenging period in my life. My journey started in Italy, where I spent blissful days surrounded by the beauty of the countryside. Then I traveled through France, camping near the vineyards of Bordeaux, and eventually made my way to the serene forests of Germany. Each location brought its own unique experiences and joys. However, when I reached a remote campsite in the Black Forest of Germany, the tone of my trip shifted. The forest was dense, with trees so tall they seemed to touch the sky. There was an ancient, almost mystical feel to the place, which both awed and unsettled me. The first 2 nights were peaceful, filled with the soothing sounds of nature. But on the third night, I noticed something odd. A figure moving at the edge of the campsite. At first, I thought it was another camper, or perhaps a forest ranger. But as I looked closer, the figure disappeared into the trees. The next day, while hiking, I had the unnerving feeling of being watched. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me turn, but there was never anyone there. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, the isolation playing tricks on my mind. That night, the feeling intensified. I heard soft footsteps outside my tent and saw shadows cast by the moonlight. I clutched my knife, too scared to sleep, jumping at every sound. Morning couldn't come soon enough. Determined to shake off my fears, I continued my journey, moving on to a campsite in the Swiss Alps. But the sense of being followed persisted. In Switzerland, I found belongings from my campsite moved or tampered with. I started to doubt my own sanity. Was I doing this in some sort of stress-induced state? Or was there really someone out there? The climax of this harrowing experience occurred in a small campsite in Austria. I woke up in the middle of the night to the unmistakable sound of someone whispering my name outside the tent. Paralyzed with fear, I listened as the voice called out, a chilling, drawn-out sing-song of my name. It wasn't a voice I recognized. The next day, I cut my trip short and returned home, the joy of my adventure overshadowed by the fear and paranoia that had taken hold of me. Looking back, I wonder if it was all in my head, a product of the loneliness and stress. But part of me knows that there was something out there in those forests, something unexplainable and terrifying. The experience has left a mark on me. I still love to travel, but now I prefer to do so with company. The memories of those whispered words in the dark, the feeling of being watched, they linger in a way that no other experience ever has. From the desolate deserts of Arizona to the haunted forests of Europe, we've journeyed through 5 true and deeply unsettling stories. Each tale a reminder of the mysteries and terrors that can lurk in the most beautiful of places. If you found these stories as chilling as I did, make sure to check out the video on your screen now. It's one of my personal favorites and takes us even deeper into the realm of the unexplained. Thank you for joining me, and until next time, stay safe and keep exploring, but always remember to tread carefully in the unknown.